Hello and welcome to the Unlocking Behaviour Change podcast, the show all about psychology and changing behaviour. I'm Jamie West. I'm a writer, musician and a performer, and I'm joined by Professor Robert West. And how are you doing today, Robert?
Yes, I'm doing very well, thank you. I just had half of an egg bap because Susan and I share an egg bap when we go out for egg bap.
How romantic. Is it like the Lady and the Tramp where you eat from one side then the other?
Something
That's sort of gross, isn't it?
No, it isn't actually, because the people at the cafe very kindly cut it in half because I want salt on my half and Susan doesn't want salt on her half. But anyway, the thing is, these I'm not going to tell you the name of the cafe, but it's in North London, and it does the best egg baps in the world. And I told them that today, and they were very appreciative. But they seriously, I mean, you'd think, how can you even make an egg bap that good?
Wow. Well, that is high praise indeed for this company that we're not going to give any, we're not going to name and not going to point people towards.
Well, we don't have. Well, what I don't want to do is a bit like with Portugal, telling everyone how wonderful Portugal is. Now everyone's going to Portugal, and it's getting a bit crowded. Anyway, but
you've got to keep it for yourself. It's your precious.
That's right.
Right. Okay. So we are talking about all things COM-B, and today we're sort of pushing it even further because, as I understand it, Robert, you guys are working on a way to implement COM-B, which has got more detail in it. We've, of course, been talking about COM-B 2.0 in recent episodes, but you have another strategy, another thing that you're bringing in, and this is over to you now. What is this new exciting strategy?
Well, thanks, Jamie, for getting everyone's hopes up, and excitement levels are absolutely through the roof. It's not as new as all that, in the sense that it's something that I and colleagues have been working on for quite some time now, and has been tried out in a couple of forms so far. But we're working on it early this year to get it into a more sort of user-friendly form and so on, and to work directly with the updated COM-B. And this is a tool that quite a few of the listeners will already know the name of, the CACTIS tool.
Oh, yes, we mentioned this.
We
CACTIS.
did, yeah. And CACTIS stands for COM-B Assessment Criteria to Intervention Strategy Spreadsheet. And there has been some discussion, and I could share this with the listeners, about whether we really need the second S, the spreadsheet part of it. It's under advisement, so watch this space. It might be CACTIS with two S's and an I. Of course, none of those actually are how you actually spell cactus, but that's fine. But it'll either be one S or two S's. Anyway, with that digression in mind, this was a
and I would like to say that the tool itself is actually a lot easier to use than the name of it is to remember.
This is true. This is so
the sort of that long acronym that you explained. I mean, I didn't quite follow it myself, but that's okay. It's CACTIS. We're good. We know that it's some kind of tool. Okay, I'm with you.
Excellent. Good. Thank you, Jamie, for all that. This was something that started with the work that I was doing with the behavioural science team in Public Health Wales, and we've been collaborating with them. And now my esteemed colleague Esther Flanagan has taken over the leadership role on developing this further. But essentially the idea is to... In the intervention development process, there's a stage that you go through where you go from your policy goals or your objectives, your overall objectives, to defining what behaviors need to take place, who needs to do what, when, in what situation, and how, and so on. That then becomes the starting point for what many listeners will now be familiar with, which is this COM-B diagnosis, the capability, opportunity, motivation, behavior diagnosis, sometimes also called a behavioral diagnosis, in which you say, okay, this is the behavior in its context that I want to change, and I've got a behavioral goal that I want to achieve. And so what do I need to do in order to, or what do I need to target in order to achieve that? And that's where COM-B comes in, because do we need, and we've been talking about all the different kinds of targets that you might have. What the CACTIS tool does is it helps you to formalize that and to be clear about the decisions you're making. But then it comes up with a sort of ready-made list of options for what you can then do to target those capability, opportunity, and motivation targets. And it does it in the form of combinations of what we call in the behavior change wheel intervention functions, which are things like education, persuasion, incentivization, coercion. There's 9 of these, essentially, which I think we've talked about them before, but we'll probably cover them again. And BCTs, behavior change techniques, specific behavior change techniques. Just to give you a very simple example, in the, I think it was the episode before last, it might have been, we said that, well, one of the possible COM-B targets might be to focus on the level of awareness of the behavior itself. This is a very, very common target. When you're trying to change behavior, very often what you're trying to do is make people aware of a behavior that they weren't aware of, or to increase the salience of the behavior in the environment in which you want it to take place. So that's the COM-B target. What the CACTIS tool does is it suggests one or more questions that you could ask in order to make that diagnosis. And let's say you decide that this is a high priority target. It then identifies for you, and this is fairly obvious, or many of them are fairly obvious, but not all of them, what intervention functions and BCTs would be relevant for that. And so one of the obvious intervention function BCT combinations is education, intervention function. BCT is increase awareness of option of a novel wanted behavior. Okay? You put those two together, that then gives you a component to your intervention strategy. Now, the one I just outlined is obviously kind of blindingly obvious. In a way, it's blindingly obvious, but it's just sort of putting a marker down for if you're doing a comms campaign, or if you're providing some sort of service in general practice, or in a company, or sending emails out, or whatever. That it puts a marker down for the people who are then going to be making this concrete in terms of the messaging and so on, as to what it is that they're trying to achieve. Other examples of BCT intervention function combinations for this particular COM-B target are present information from credible influence, BCT. Now that is obviously...
And that's persuasion. That's the function there is persuasion.
Thing. Yes, exactly. So the first one was an education function. This is a persuasion intervention function, because obviously you're trying to get people to accept your message, and if it's coming from a source that isn't credible, of course, this is incredibly basic, but also incredibly important. And important to sort of keep in mind that if it's not coming from a credible influence, then you're not even on the starting blocks. Other ones that in this sort of category, persuasion category for this, would be, we've got one called tell to change their behavior, or command, you could think about it. So it's just very simply, do this, right? This is what you got to do. But another one, which is a bit softer, would be suggest to change behavior. And then the other one, which is in this sort of bucket, is increase salience of the behavior. So now, as I say, as I'm saying this, people might think, well, those are kind of obvious. But what the important part of the important thing here is that you're going through a really structured process to arrive at things that could easily get neglected if you didn't do it. It's a bit like the takeoff and landing checklists when you're in control of an airplane. It says, okay, these are the options, and then you can, with your evidence and your audience research and your understanding of the particular situation in which you find yourself, you can say, right, I'm going to focus on the credible influence one, because I'm concerned that, if I just say it, people won't believe it. So I need to pay attention to that. And also, I'm going to go for suggest to change the behavior rather than tell, because this is the kind of scenario where I wouldn't be thought of by the audience as having the authority to tell people. So I'm going to suggest it. And you might then add to that the increased salience of the behavior, because you might be concerned that although they've accepted it while they're reading the message, for example, when it comes time to do the behavior, it will have gone out of their head. So it sounds simple, it sounds basic, and a lot of the science, the application of behavioral science here, is in the implementation of these. But what it does do, and I hope this comes across to the listeners, is it gives you this really nice and comprehensive, structured mapping of the COM-B target to the things that you actually do to achieve that.
So there's a couple of things that occurred to me as you were talking that through. One of them was that the value of having a structured approach becomes apparent, not exactly at a time like this when we're talking about a structured approach and it seems obvious because that's the construct of our whole conversation. But when you are in a meeting with people together, deciding things collectively, and meetings can veer off in very wild directions. I'm sure a lot of people will be able to relate to that. And if you have a framework that you can refer back to, because you're definitely going to veer off in a meeting, of course, because you're going to want to talk about the biscuits. But it's important that you have a framework you can come back to and say, oh, if somebody's gone off on a tangent, or they've gone off on a hobby horse, or they have a great idea, it might be and that might dominate other things that might come up. The other thing I wanted to mention was, it occurred to me that an example of this that I feel like I've noticed in terms of public health messaging here in the UK is the government trying to get people to use pharmacies as opposed to going to their GP for certain things. And that, what made me think of that was going, okay, what's the novel wanted behavior? Well, the novel wanted behavior is actually the pharmacy can do this for you, right? So, I didn't think to go to the pharmacy for that. And they're very clear on what they're trying to do. Then they're trying to persuade you that the pharmacy is a credible place. They are trained there to deal with specific kinds of problems that will take pressure off the GP services. So that was the real life kind of example that I thought probably was quite effective. I myself have thought about that sometimes. I'm like, oh, this is quite minor. Can I go and see the pharmacist initially? And then the pharmacist just goes, go see your GP.
Not our pharmacist. We have a very good pharmacist. Actually, yeah, that's right. And it harks back to something that, again, in CACTIS and in the updated COM-B, we've always said it, but we've made it more, I think, upfront in this version, which is that it's not just about the behavior, sort of like getting advice from, or getting some sort of, in the case of the pharmacy thing, about an illness. But it's not just about the behavior. It's about the behavior. It's about the context, the situation, like who you're getting advice from. Okay, so it's about how you do the behavior. It's about the timing of the behavior, when you do it, and how long you do it for, and so on. So any of those features, the situation, like going to the pharmacy instead of the GP, the timing, the context, or the how of the behavior, are all part of the package which you could be making people aware of in this. So it's not just, you should do this. But you should do this, or have you thought about doing this in this context, in this particular way, at this particular time. And so in the updated CACTIS tool, it really brings home, and again, with the sort of checklist approach, saying, okay, the classic sort of who, what, when, how, and for how long, and so on. They're all things that are part of that package that you're trying to shape in terms of changing behavior.
And in terms of the example we were just talking about, where we were discussing the pharmacy, using the pharmacy as opposed to visiting the GP, that was targeting, in terms of COM-B, it was targeting the capability. That's really important to note, because each one of these, sort of this massive spreadsheet thing that you've created, it targets one of those elements: capability, opportunity, and motivation. And that comes under how that is increasing someone's capability. Just have them having an awareness of that helps increase their capability, which then can lead to the behavior.
Yeah, exactly. And we talk about, and I've raised this issue of the intervention function BC. It's getting a bit technical now, but I think it's important, and hopefully it will come across. But we've raised this thing about the intervention function BCT combination as being the key thing here. And the reason for that is that the same BCT could be done in a way that was like education, or it could be done in a way that was persuasion. Some BCTs can only be done as persuasion or education or whatever. But there's an important distinction here, let's say, between education and persuasion, and how you present the BCT. Because if you come across, let's say you're increasing awareness of the option of novel behavior, but you were to do that in a way that was attempting to be persuasive, then you're going to run up against barriers with regards to people going, well, don't tell me about the behavior. People are automatically sort of putting up their sort of defense mechanisms. But if you are approaching it from an education point of view, which is, did you know, maybe you already do know, but in case you didn't, here is something that you might want to consider. That is an education function.
So what you're saying is that, let's say you're letting someone know about the opportunity to visit the pharmacist. You may have a sort of a way of thinking about that which might be persuasive. You might think, I need to persuade this person. So you're they don't even know about it at all at the moment, right? They just know nothing about it. And you're like, I need to persuade this person to do that. So you come in with a persuasive mindset. You're all the sales tactics, get it while it lasts or whatever. But I don't think you could use that for pharmacists. But anyway, you're going to be coming in with a persuasive mindset. But what you're saying is, actually, if you think of that, increasing the awareness in terms of education, then it might not be persuasive. You might not be trying to persuade them. That the function of that is not at least overtly persuasive. It's giving them a sense of more a sense of just letting someone know without trying to sort of put any more, I don't know, pressure tactics on them, I suppose. Whereas if you're trying to persuade somebody, then you kind of do switch on different kind of pressure tactics that you've mentioned.
That's right. And if you're in that mode, you have to think carefully about the level of pressure and how you do it. So that's why we make this distinction between telling someone to change their behavior and suggesting. And there are decisions to be made in your messaging and in your communications program about what kind of a approach you adopt, where you are on that sort of spectrum. Sometimes you can, if it's the army, for example, and you're the sergeant and these are your sort of squaddies, you can just say, do this. And there is an acceptance in the social situation there that you have the authority to tell someone to do something, so you do it. Similarly with signposting, signage on whether it's, warning signs or, don't use the lift in case of fire kind of thing. So, there are decisions, even in this sort of little micro environment within the sort of behavior change space, there are decisions that have to be made that could make a big difference to how effective your communication strategy is.
Okay, so let's look at a bit more of the other sort of intervention functions and behavior change techniques that one could use when trying to sort of increase someone's sense of capability. What else can people do?
Well, the obvious next thing is the level of understanding of what the behavior actually involves. So what is it? What is this behavior? And sometimes it's really obvious, and so you don't need to target it, but sometimes you really do. And with that one, there are a number of quite a fairly hefty number of intervention function BCT combinations that you might want to deploy here. If we look at education as the intervention function, which is focusing on just simply increasing knowledge and understanding, the obvious one is instruct on how to perform the wanted behavior. So you give instruction. And then again, there's a whole behavioral science about how to do that well in particular contexts. Or, so that's telling people how to do it, not telling people to do it, but telling people how to do it. But you can also be a little softer and suggest how they might like to try doing it. Another one is you can agree with them how they might want to perform the wanted behavior. So, for example, if you're setting up a quit date with a smoker, you wouldn't just say this is going to be your quit date. You would agree with the person about what would be a suitable quit date for them. You might make a suggestion and then come to an agreement. You would also potentially, if they're already starting to do the behavior, provide feedback on how they're doing it. Those are all kind of education functions. And then when you get into training, which is more about skill development, there's things like the same thing, instruct on how to perform the behavior, but if you do it in a training context or in a training intervention function, it's obviously a lot more involved and there's a lot more sort of toing and froing, sort of backwards and forwards. You might demonstrate the wanted behavior. And another one which is also really important and actually has a really nice evidence base supporting it, backing it up in particular contexts, is the concept of setting graded tasks. So if you've got a task, this will be familiar, I think, to people when I mention it, but whether it's driving or flying an airplane or operating a computer or whatever, start simple and build it up. And again, with this checklist approach, all of these are potential options for you to improve the level of understanding of what the behavior involves. And then just to sort of complete the set, under the enablement intervention function, we've got action planning, helping people to set their decide how they're going to engage in the task. Goal setting, incredibly important. And then even get some agreement with the person about how they're going to perform the wanted behavior again. So,
and that one's come up twice there, hasn't it? That agree on how to perform the wanted behavior. You mentioned that in terms of education, and you've also put that in terms of under the heading of persuasion as well.
Yeah. And it illustrates this point that we were talking about earlier. It's about the how you do it. So you've got this BCT. You could do it in a purely educational way, right? This is, you're the driving instructor. This is how you change gear or whatever. If you do it in other contexts for other kinds of tasks, you might do it in a persuasive type way or a persuasion type intervention function way, where it's not enough for you just to tell the person and then, okay, they get it. You're having to sort of convince them that this is a good way of performing the behavior. Have you thought of doing it like this? And then they go, well, I'm not so sure. And you sort of then develop it. So it sort of illustrates this, I think, relatively novel idea that behavior change techniques can be delivered in different ways according to what intervention functions they sort of sit in.
It's interesting. It makes me think it's sort of very much scientific, but then when you get down into how you're actually going to implement these things, there's also a kind of an art to it and a lot of judgment in terms of, anything that's going to involve, well, which technique are we going to use? And then how am I going to persuade this particular person or this group of people. So it's systematized, if you like. Is that the right word, systematized?
Yeah, I think it is. It's a good word. I like it.
Okay. But then within that, then actually there's plenty of room and scope for the individual personalities of the people who are trying to, influence someone else's behavior, for them to work well with what they can do well. You may have a very persuasive person and they may be able to lean into that in a way that somebody else who's less persuasive goes, actually, I'm better at training, I'm better at education, and that is more effective for me.
Yeah, and it's worth reminding people that, of course, what you're getting here is just the sort of storyboard for your intervention. Then in order to get your finished product, there's an awful lot of work to do in terms of, okay, what's the mode of delivery? How are you going to deliver this? What's the style of delivery? What's the timing, the schedule, and so on? And those are all things that play a crucial role. So if you think of it like, trying to create a film, there's so much that lies between the storyboard and the finished product, where things can be done well or badly or right or wrong. But what the CACTIS tool does is it helps you to create the storyboard. That's its job.
Lovely. I love that. The storyboard into reality. If experience in the film industry is anything to go by, lots of meetings between the storyboard and the finished product. But anyway, that's all we've got time for this week. Thank you so much, Robert.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure.
And thank you for listening wherever you are. Do have a look down in the links in the description to buy our books and whatnot. And we look forward to joining you next time on the Unlocking Behaviour Change podcast.